Welcome back to Nerd's Best Advice, and today we're gonna continue some more in C++. Now, if you haven't watched the previous videos and you're just here to find out about functions, that's great. If you haven't learned about anything that you see up on the screen right now, I'd encourage you to go back and check out the previous videos in this line of tutorials, and you can find the link for the playlist down in that description. Alright, so last time we learned about variable types, and now we're going to do a little bit with functions. Now functions are great because they allow us to do a few things, and the first one of those is allow us to not have to write the same code more than once. So if there's something that we do a lot in a program, we can write a function to do it, and then just write a single line of code to do the complex operation we want to do multiple times. Now another thing they allow us to do is to tidy up our code. So right here in the main program, a lot of times we'll have to do a lot of things in a program, and we don't want to have this main program be, pages and pages and pages long when we can write functions to do it and just have it be maybe 50, 100 lines long. So functions are really neat, and I'm gonna do my best to teach you about them briefly in this tutorial. So just like variables, functions can have types. And basically any type of the basic variables, functions can be that type. So you can have a function that returns an integer, a function that returns a string, and a double, and so on. And I'll show you what I mean by returning now. So first of all, let's write a function, and this function will be of type int. So first, it'll be just like you're starting to declare a variable. We'll type int. And what this function is going to do is going to multiply by 2. So we're going to name it multiply by 2, and then left and right parentheses, and then just like with main, we do the left and right curly brackets. So now we have written a function that we can go ahead and call from the main part of our program. So if we go multiply by 2, you can see here that Visual Studio gives us this function to call. So to call a function, of course you usually do this in your main program, but you can call functions from other functions as well, as long as they are in the same namespace. You just do the function name and then left and right parentheses and then a semicolon. So right now this function does nothing. When you call this function, it basically sends the program up to here, to these curly braces, and runs whatever is in the middle here, this code, and then when it gets to the ending curly bracket, it goes back here and continues running the program. So let's write some code to multiply by 2. The only issue is it's kind of hard to multiply something by 2 if we don't have anything to multiply by 2. So there's something you can do with functions called passing data. And what this allows us to do is give data or write a variable name or some data down here, and then that data is then passed and is usable to this function right here. So since we're returning an integer, we will also ask for an integer. So it'll be just like you're declaring a variable in here. We'll call it an int, and we'll name it passed var. So now you can see here that Visual Studio tells us that we have an error with our function call here. And what it's saying is there's too few arguments, which means that there's something that we should be passing that we aren't. So in this case, it happens to be an integer, so we'll just pass it a 5. And you can also put variables here as long as they are the data type that is required. So now let's go ahead and write a program or a little piece of code to multiply this passed variable by 2. Now we are going to do this in such a way that we'll have a variable inside this function, and we'll set that variable to the result or the product of the passed variable and 2, and then we'll return that variable. In this simple function you could just return the product of the two numbers, but we'll do it this way, and this is a way you would generally have to do it if you were writing a larger function. So we'll do int, we'll just call it temp, and we'll set that equal to 0 just to be safe. So now we're going to set temp equal to the passed var, and we'll make sure that we spelled this right. And then in C++, what we can do is just hit the star key, which will multiply, and then the number 2. So now make sure you have the semicolon there, and now temp is going to be equal to whatever the user typed in times 2. Now that we have the answer, we need to get it back to the main function call. So you can see here Visual Studio is giving us an error, and it should be saying something like not all paths return a value. So if your function is of type integer, you need to return an integer. So to return a value, you simply type return and then the value. So this can be a number as long as it's an integer, or in our case it's going to be a variable, TMP. Now this multiplied by 2 with the past argument 5 is equal to 10. So this right here can be treated as an integer, as this function is of type integer. So what we can do is go cout 2 less than signs, and then multiply by 2 with the past 5. And then we're just going to do int tmp down here and cin tmp, just to keep the console window open. And now we can go ahead and test this by hitting F5 or the local Windows debugger up in the top. So you can see here our output is 10, which stands to reason that 5 multiplied by 2 is 10. This is great. Now we know how to pass values to functions. Another thing you can do with functions is have multiple data types by the same name. So the problem with having a multiply by 2 function that returns type integer is if we typed in 5.5 as an argument and ran the program, 5.5 is of type double, not of type integer. Integers are whole numbers. So although the real answer should be 11, we get the answer 10, because it basically chops off anything after the decimal place if it's an integer. So let's say we want to have a function that returns a double and multiplies by 2. How we can do that is we'll just copy and paste the code of the multiply by 2 function, change the return type to double, change the argument type to double as well, and we'll change the temp variable to of type double. So now what will happen is when you run the program, you're passing a double. So the function that will be called will be the one that most closely matches your function call. And since you're passing a double, and there's a function here that is requesting a double, this piece of code will be executed, not this piece. So to execute this piece, all you would do is change this to 5. So let's go 5.5 here, and we'll just do cout double function and end line. And we'll copy and paste this up here, and we'll type integer function. And what we'll do is we'll cout both of these, and one of them will be 5 and one will be 5.5. And in between here we'll do a cout endl, so that it'll be a little neater. So now let's run this and see what happens. So you can see here that the first one we called was with a 5.5, and sure enough it ran the double function, returned 11, and the second one was 5, which is an integer, and it ran the integer function and returned a 10. So this is called overloading functions. So the function has the same name, but takes or returns different data types. So this could have returned an integer as well, but would take an argument of type double. So you can also do functions of type, for example, string. So let's write a quick function that returns a string. So again, making sure we have include string up here at the top, and we'll type string. Let's do a combined string function. Strings already have member functions of their own that will combine strings, or you can use the addition operator. So basically what we're doing is a little bit redundant, but it helps us understand what you can do with functions. So we'll take 2 arguments here, both of type string. One is called first, and the second again is of type string and is called second. And then close off the parentheses and do the curly brackets. So what we're going to do here is we're going to ask the user, well, not ask the user, but when you use the function, we're going to ask for 2 strings, and we're going to return the 2 strings combined. So basically, if we typed in, or we gave hello, and we gave world, we would return hello world, all as one string. So this is relatively easy, and again, we'll create a temporary variable of type string. And we'll do tmp equals first plus second. Now with strings, this plus operator is concatenation, so it simply pushes them together and makes them into one string. Again, this is different for every data type, so integers, the plus sign will literally add the numbers, same with doubles. But with strings, it concatenates them, it puts them together. So now this temp variable is equal to the first and the second smushed together. Now of course we need to return this value so that we can use it, so we type return tmp semicolon. Now down here, we'll go ahead and output this. So let's do cout combine string, and the first one we'll do hello space, and for the second one, and to pass multiple arguments, you just put a comma in between them, and we'll do world. So notice that I put a space in between here. If we didn't put a space, it would just be hello world all smushed together, but to make this print better, we'll do that. So again, notice that we pass two separate strings. These are two separate strings, and if we run it by pressing F5 or clicking the local Windows debugger here up at the top, what we should get is one single output string, which is hello world. So there's one more thing about functions that is quite important, and that is the idea that you can pass values by reference or by value. So what we've been doing here is passing them by value, and what that means is, for example, let's go ahead and call the multiply by 2 function again. And this time let's create an integer in the main function called pass var, and we'll set it equal to 4. And here when we call multiply by 2, we'll pass the pass var. So what we're doing, we'll get rid of this just to make it a little easier to see here. When we call multiply by 2, we're passing the number 4 to this function. So we're not passing this variable to this function. So if we modified past var, so if we set past var up here equal to 14, for example, this variable down here will still equal 4, because what we're doing is we're making a copy of the value in this variable and then sending it up to this function. Now there are certain instances where you want to be able to change this value, and how you do that is go up here to where you're declaring a function, and after the data type, simply type an ampersand, which is usually shift and then the 7 key. Now this is telling it to pass by reference. So what this is doing is it's basically telling the function where in your memory the variable that you're passing is located. So now we can change the value here. So an easy way to test this, I guess, is to get rid of this functionality. So it will no longer multiply by 2. And we'll call it modify variable. And we'll change this to type void. And what a void type is it returns nothing. So it'll just run code in here. So multiply by 2 is no longer exists, so we'll call modify variable with pass var. And what we're going to do is we're going to set past var, so again the variable that we can access up here, which is right now just a reference to this variable. We're going to set that equal to 15. And then what we're going to do out here in the main function is cout pass var. So if you looked at the code right down here, you'd see that pass var is equal to 4, so you'd expect to see a 4 on the output. But what this function is doing is it's literally going to the location that this variable is at in the memory and changing it to a 15. So if the program worked, and we'll run it by hitting F5, we should see a 15 as an output. And sure enough, here's a 15. So again, there's a lot of types that you can make a function, but the main ones are the void, the int, the double, and string. And again, passing by value and passing by reference are two important things that you should know, and passing by value is generally safer because you cannot modify the original variable from within the function. So if you liked this video, thought it was worth it, I'd appreciate it if you share it with your friends or subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you can be notified of my future videos. I really appreciate you watching because you are what keeps me alive. Have a wonderful day, a Merry Christmas, and we will see you next time.